and Tom Brokaw.
Let's talk about a convention where the Democrats were not too popular with the country. That's the 72 convention.
A disaster for the Democrats. You had Jerry Rubin, on the perimeter of the convention, big fights going on. The Republicans were tagging them with abortion, amnesty, and acid, as I remember, were the 3 A's. Right. And they arrived at the convention without a vice presidential candidate and met late into the night trying to decide who they were going to have, and it was Senator Eagleton of Missouri eventually.
And then, of course, that became a bit of an affair that cost them to break up the ticket and start over again with Sarge Shriver.
But the convention itself, conventions are portraits of parties at a time, and that was well out of the mainstream of what America thought that it was. 72, we still had the war going on. Right. George McGovern was a courageous soldier in the fight against the war, but the people around him didn't look much like middle America or mainstream America.
I remember Gloria Steinem dressed him up for that convention. She got him to wear sharper, more flashy clothes because he was a quiet guy. But the other people looked like, as Tip O'Neill used to say, the cast of hair.
Yeah.
And everybody had long hair.
The 72 convention, you can't overlook the fact that they, for the first time, they had really reformed the rules of the convention. They'd taken the convention away from the party bosses, away from the Richard Daleys of the world, and they rewrote the rules who could be a delegate. And you had to have a representative delegation, X amount of Hispanics and women and people of color.
Let me ask you about the big fight between Ronald Reagan and Jerry Ford at the decisive 76 convention. That was one of the last ones that could have gone either way, right?
That was a real battle royal, and the Mississippi delegation, led by Clark Reed, was pivotal to all that. They ended up going with Jerry Ford. Reagan hung in there to the end. I had the last interview with him.
Well, I'm at peace with myself. We did everything that could be done. The decision was made last night, and I accept that.
And he was very reflective, and it was clear at that point that he knew that at some point he'd get his crack at the presidency, and he felt that it was part of his destiny. They went with Bob Dole. Instead, Reagan was then summoned down to the stage, and the entire floor of the delegation of the convention realized maybe we nominated the wrong guy, because Reagan got up there and just electrified the place.
We must go forth from here united, determined that what a great general said a few years ago is true. There is no substitute for victory. Mr. President.
I mean, Jerry Ford deserved the nomination. He'd healed the country. He'd done a wonderful job. He ran a very strong campaign. But when you put those two guys on the same platform, there's just no comparison in terms of charisma and ability to captivate a crowd and articulate, if you will, what the Republican Party stood for.
Much more to come when our special Picking Our Presidents returns.
Well, one thought going through mine is that the audiences applauded louder for the man they did not nominate.
Our presidents, the greatest moments. Once again, Chris Matthews and Tom Brokaw.
Let's move it forward to 1980, when you had that interesting fight between Jimmy Carter, the president, fighting hard for re-election,
and Ted Kennedy,
who wanted the job. There was some bad stuff at that convention.
Jimmy Carter arrived in New York with enough delegates to get the nomination. They'd fought a hard but losing fight all along the way, the Kennedys had. And so when they got to the floor, they were hoping that they could get something going there.
David, I've been spending a good deal of the last couple of hours chasing around after reports from Kennedy operatives down here about where they're picking up votes or where there's softness.
They tried to get a vote on some resolution to liberate all the delegates and let them vote it their own way again.
Right. Vote according to their conscience, not according to how they had voted within the states or within their caucuses.
Trust the delegates. Be strong. Be confident, and you let your delegates be free. It isn't fair to change the rules now.
And that went on for a couple of days, and there was a lot of promises made on the part of the Kennedy floor managers, but they couldn't deliver.
Pennsylvania casts 102 yes votes, 83 no votes.
That does it. Carter's side wins the vote on the rules.
And then Ted Kennedy came to the convention and gave one of the most electrifying speeches in modern convention history.
For me, a few hours ago, this campaign came to an end. For all those whose cares have been our concern, the work goes on, the cause endures, the hope still lives, and the dream shall never die.
And the din afterwards, it was so emotional down there, you couldn't hear yourself. People were cheering and crying and weeping. And I don't think that they believed that they nominated the wrong person, but they did feel that they had at least caught the magic of the Kennedy wave in some fashion.
What did you make of the terrible moment, we'll be looking at it here, of
on the platform?
Yeah, where this weird sort of negative pirouette, or what it did, the mating dance in reverse, where Teddy was trying to avoid the grasp of Carter for the victory salute.
I actually have talked to all the parties that were up there that night, and the Carters were really hurt by that. I mean, they really felt that it hurt them, because it was an image that was played out as the president was trying to shake his hand. Ted Kennedy was going around the rim of the platform and waving to the people who were out there. And they felt that they'd done the right thing, the Carters had, and that they had been rejected by the senator. My guess is that if Senator Kennedy had to do that over again, he probably would think twice about the conduct, because it was hurting the party at the time that they were doing it. It certainly was a powerful image.
Well, tell me about that wacky move by the Reagan people to try to recruit former President Jerry Ford in 1980 at that convention.
Longest night I ever spent at a convention.
There was lots of buzz on all the networks about the possibility that Reagan wasn't really confident he could win the election against an incumbent president. And so to bolster his candidacy and to make him more mainstream, he was talking about bringing back former President Jerry Ford. What was that about, and what went wrong?
Well, I'm not sure that it went wrong in the final analysis, because I personally believe that it would have been a disaster if they'd stuck to the original contract that they were talking about. We were all on the floor of the convention in Detroit, and CBS began to report that it was a done deal early on. Walter and Dan on the floor and so on, and we were not getting the indication that this thing was sewn up yet. Late in the evening, I went down the aisle, and on side-by-side delegations with Jim Thompson, who's now in the 9/11 Commission, was governor of Illinois, and Bob Ray was governor of Iowa. And Bob Ray I'd known reasonably well, and he said to me, "It's over. They've gotten the deal." And I said, "How can you be sure, Governor?" And he said, "Look at Jim Thompson." I turned around, and Thompson pulled back his lapel.
Governor Jim Thompson of Illinois, wearing a button, put down the sign that says Reagan, and then he's added Ford. Do they have a deal?
And he had a Reagan-Ford button.
Governor Ray?
And I interviewed both of them.
Is it your understanding that the deal has been struck between Gerald Ford and Ronald Reagan?
That's my understanding.
And they couldn't quite say that they had been told, but we were 99% of the way there. I finished the interview, and Bob Dole, I turned around, and Bob Dole was right here in my face. He said, "What'd they just tell you?" I said, "They say it's a done deal." He said, "It's not. Go back on the air and say it's not a done deal."
Thank you very much, Senator Robert Dole of Kansas, who was convinced that if the deal has been struck, it has not been announced. He says we ought not to get too carried away here.
35 minutes later, I'm down on the floor next to Bob Michael, who was the floor leader for Ronald Reagan.
You wouldn't mind a few more moments of suspense, would you?
Well, I guess not, just as long as we had a little indication that something might in fact happen. Is that your understanding?
Well.
And of course they came in, and Chris Wallace, our guy, got the first word, went on the air and said, "It's Bush," beating Leslie Stahl by 0.03 seconds.
But that was really Bush was a definite second choice.
Yes, he was.
Why didn't it work?
I think there were too many demands on the part of President Ford about what his role would be. He'd been an ex-president. I mean, he was an ex-president. He'd been the chief executive of the United States, and it got to be a kind of a contract. They were rewriting the
Too explicit.
Yeah, rewriting the Constitution.
You think that former President Ford had been a tad more humble in his request on that contract?
I think it could very well have gone through.
When we come back, the biggest moment and most dangerous hazard for the candidate himself, the speech.
Mr. Reagan will raise taxes, and so will I.